What is up, my ninjas? It's Wes, the humble libertarian. Wanted to talk to you about this because it's a question I get every so often. I'm such an advocate for very limited government that people will sometimes ask me, were you like an anarchist or something? And to that, I would reply, I believe you are the anarchist. Actually, if you support government, especially the way it is now, you're an anarchist. And that sounds crazy, I know, so hear me out, because it's really not. Remember, by the way, that throughout history, most progress has been made by the heretics, the people on the lunatic fringe. Ideas used to be ideas of progress, like you can measure how far away the stars and planets are, and you can tell that the earth moves around the sun. Were so unacceptable to society in the past that people were confined to house arrest. Some people were tortured and executed for advancing ideas that were so far out of not even the mainstream of thought, not even acceptable thought, but thought that anyone except for that lunatic was even capable of having. And the lunatics often turn out to be right. Well, not all of them. Sometimes they're just lunatics. But you should listen to them and hear them out instead of label them and shut them out, because they might have something to say that will change the world for the better. They might know something. And this is an interesting exercise, by the way, that Peter Thiel talks about in his book, 0 to 1. Published it a few years back, I think in 2014 or 15. Peter Thiel, by the way, in case you don't know, he started PayPal, and I'll tell you, I'll bear with me. I think you might like this story if you haven't heard about this, and we'll get to it. Government is anarchy. I know that sounds absolutely crazy, but I've got an explanation that I think many of you will find at least coherent and understandable, and I think even many of you will totally agree with me. But let me tell you a quick story about Peter Thiel and tell you about this exercise he recommends in his book, 0 to 1. Peter Thiel founded PayPal, and what he was trying to do at the time, he and a very small team of people in this tech startup, was they were trying to create Bitcoin. They were trying to create, Peter Thiel says it himself, they were trying to create an alternative to the US dollar that would eventually come to prominence as the most used currency in the world and basically overthrow the dollar in a bloodless revolution of pure commerce. So they wanted to offer a money system that was better than the dollar and just offer it to people and get them to use it. Well, their first foray into this was they were going to see, here's what Peter Thiel says you do when you're going to start a business. And he's someone worth listening to because, they sold PayPal for like $1.5 billion. And then he started another company called Palantir that is worth over $1 billion. And he was a very early investor in Facebook and made handsome profits off of that. And he's currently a Bitcoin maximalist and believes that Bitcoin will be the world's number one reserve currency, and that it's one of the smartest investments you can make. And he's putting his money where his mouth is. He's put quite a bit. He's dumped quite a few US dollars for Bitcoin. which he is holding on to and waiting, biding his time. And it really is only a matter of time at this point, from the point of view of Peter Thiel and many others who are very knowledgeable about both technology and finance and economics. So Peter Thiel says when you're starting a business, what you do is you find a small market that you can serve, and they become your customers. And then from there you expand. So at the other extreme of that is trying to start a restaurant. It's the biggest market there is. It's your whole city. And there's so many other restaurants. And you're all kind of doing the same thing. You might think what you're doing is a little different. You might think the seasoning or your recipes or your marketing and gimmicks, whatever it is, but it is the competition is so fierce. The market is so vast and diffuse that it's just very difficult, and that's why most restaurants fail. I've heard people rattle off like 90% of restaurants fail within the first year. I've heard people rattle that off. I don't know if I don't just want to repeat rumors because I don't have that from an exact source. So I don't know if it's exactly right, but it's something very extreme like that most restaurants fail pretty quickly. So what Peter Thiel did was, okay, well, I'll give you one example of the other extreme, and then I'll tell you how Peter Thiel did it. So the other example is Facebook. Who's our customers? They didn't try to make everybody their customers. That probably wouldn't have worked. They tried to make just Harvard students their customers. And it worked. And from there, they slowly rolled out to other colleges. And it was just college students. So still, they didn't just go from Harvard students to everybody. They continued to make measured progress in increasingly larger markets, taking the lessons and the infrastructure they'd built and everything, and then now you've got customers, and so it's scalable growth. You actually have a business that has rungs of a ladder that it can climb each rung, and instead of reaching all the way for the rung at the top of the ladder from the bottom, well, Peter Thiel tried to do this when they started PayPal. So they said, we'll make BlackBerry users our market. This was in the 90s. And they created an app, and it's a really amazing technology. They made the software so that you can beam money from your BlackBerry to someone else's BlackBerry. But what they found was this wasn't a very solid market, because most people who bought BlackBerries were just kind of toys. People weren't really, you buy it and fiddle with it for a week or a month. They hadn't reached the point that smartphones are at today, thanks to Steve Jobs. They were still kind of toys for the wealthy. And not every person who might want to send money to someone else would be like in the same room, which is I think how the technology worked. And they couldn't get any traction, so they thought, okay, well, what are we going to do now? They created an online payment processor, and they decided their next market that they would try would be eBay power sellers. It's a small market, and they had like maybe a couple thousand eBay power sellers. That's people selling on eBay in excess of a certain number, very high volume sellers, and there weren't many of them, just a couple thousand. It'd be easy to figure out who they are, and PayPal had something that they really needed, something that they really wanted, that they would pay a fee to use for each transaction, and they had a business. And from there, they expanded and became PayPal, sold it for $1.5 billion. And so that's part of the message from 0 to 1. And of course, PayPal was just a payment processor for US dollars, and they never got to the point of creating something that would actually be a different money in place of the dollar, like Bitcoin has, and now 1,000 other cryptocurrencies, private, digital, cryptography secured currencies. But Peter Thiel says in 0 to 1 that when he interviews people he asks them, it's all coming back full circle. He asks them, what is something that most of the world thinks is true that you disagree with? What is something you believe you have the right perspective on and almost the entire world disagrees? Because there's a lot of value in that. That's where all the value is. That's who's changing the world. Not everybody who has an idea that's completely different from what most of the world thinks succeeds, but most of the people who succeed on a superlative level, most of the people who are really making the greatest strides of progress for the human race are the ones who go off the map and discover something that no one else knows yet, or not many other people know yet. And then they try, as the lunatic fringe, to bring people on board with this discovery that they've made. And you get a wave of early adopters. And if it's a really great idea, and if they're really right and the rest of the world is wrong, then you get middle adopters, and you get the masses, and then finally the late adopters, the stragglers. I just bring all of this up to say that a lot of what libertarianism is when it comes to politics, there are so many things, so many ideas and ways of looking at the world that people have that are nearly universal, and that libertarians believe we know something better. It's just like slavery in the 1800s. You know, you were a lunatic almost in America to say slavery is completely unacceptable. It's one of the worst sins we're possibly capable of. You were a lunatic to say that, and there were some lunatics saying it. The Society of Friends, Quakers, in like Pennsylvania and Ohio. There were abolitionists. Adam Smith was an abolitionist. He was the second president of the United States. And a lot of people couldn't see it happening any other way. They were so entrenched in a certain view of the world that to almost everybody today seems lunatic and crazy. We can't imagine owning another person and treating them like a farm animal and never allowing a human being to rise above the existence of a farm animal. Someone you beat to till your fields faster and gather your crops. It's weird to think about, but there are more things like that now. It's highly unlikely that we've discovered all there is to know and that we've got everything perfect. We're doing great, but there are still maybe some ideas left that need to be overturned by a lunatic fringe. And I understand that some of what I say, I do understand some of what I say sounds crazy to most people, but I've got a good reason behind it. And I just ask that people hear out, as I state my case, hear out what I have to say. And I think more and more people will start to listen and think about it and see that taxation is theft. And also that if you support government, you're an anarchist. I know that sounds crazy, but here it is. If you support government, you're an anarchist, because there are a very few, very simple rules that human beings have had for thousands of years. These rules, again, there aren't many of them, And they're very simple. And they haven't changed. And they're universal. Every ancient culture documents that these are the rules. Every ancient religion, even every ancient government, the first governments start putting laws down. And it's very, very simple. Don't steal. Don't murder. Don't lie. These are the rules. There aren't many of them. They don't change. We've had them forever. They're universal. So, insofar as I fully agree with these rules and support them, I am not an anarchist. I believe in order and I believe in rule of law. And I'm also a conservative in that way because these are some of the oldest rules and I don't like us changing them or making any exceptions to them. I think they're non-negotiable. Don't steal. Don't murder. Don't lie. And the thing about government is we make all kinds of exceptions for government to those rules. And we come up with every rationalization our spinning minds can possibly think of to justify it and say it's okay when the government steals, when the government murders. No one else. We don't permit anyone else to do it. See? That's law. That's order. But when you introduce an organization into a group of people who don't steal from each other, don't murder each other, and don't lie to each other too much, you get anarchy. That is, you introduce an organization. Sorry, I didn't finish that sentence. When you introduce an organization into a society of people that mostly don't steal, murder, or lie to each other, defraud each other. I mean, listen, it's amazing. I'm not saying people don't lie or that they don't murder or that they don't steal, but these are the very rare exceptions in most of society. Most of us just don't do it. We don't have to be governed. We just know not to do it. We govern ourselves. Our traditions govern us. Our belief in those traditions. We've been conditioned through thousands of years of societal evolution and cultural evolution to respect the inherent rights of other people, to respect the individual, and to cooperate with others peacefully instead of interacting with them through threats, violence, force, theft, murder, fraud. Murder is the very rare exception. Now more than ever, I don't have the exact figures off the top of my head. I should memorize them though, because it's something interesting to know. But if you Google and look at the figures, violence is on the wane. Today, in 2018, violence, homicide in a lot of countries is at the lowest level. And it seems opposite of that when you look at the news because murder is such an exception and such a terrible thing that when it does happen, people report it and we talk about it. And so we get this sense that it's happening more than it really is. The media creates this matrix. Maybe not on purpose, maybe kind of on purpose, but the media, just by the nature of what happens when there's something remarkable like a murder, a serial killer, or a rampage shooter, it is so remarkable, it is so unusual, and it is so terrible that we end up talking a lot about it and paying more attention to it in the media than we do to just stories that aren't news, stories that are just the same story every day. Millions of people wake up, go to work and school, go about their business, go home, eat some food, watch some shows. It's boring because it's what happens every day. But it's not boring, it's exciting. It's just not as exciting as murder. So the news tells us about that. And we talk about it. And we feel like it's happening more than it really is. And that is a problem. I don't know what to do about it. It's something I'm thinking about a lot. If you have any ideas, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I'd be happy to engage with you on that discussion. Because I would like to figure out how do we, we could just stop doing it. We could just stop watching news and stop clicking on these stories. But I don't know if that's realistic. There's got to be some way to reckon with this and to make, you do want to know about things happening in the world, especially really crazy things, man. But we've got to find some way of putting it all in perspective, and understanding it's not probably going to happen to you. It's a rare exception. But this media narrative of violence and all kinds of problems that they want to tell you about because it's interesting, it's exciting, it gets your attention because it's something terrible and it's potentially a threat, so you want to know about it. A lot of it does end up serving the government. It serves as the basis for radical legislative proposals to allow this vast organization, the United States government, and the other governments of the world have the same dynamic happening in their countries. Allows them to intervene radically and very, I would say, inappropriately, to say the least, to use like the nicest word I can for it, in the lives of their people. And what we let government do is fund its activities through taxation. No other organization can tax you. It's not anarchy everywhere else. Everywhere else, it's order. No company, no charity can take your money from you by force. They have to persuade you to contribute money to them for something else you get back that you would rather have instead of the money that you're giving up to them. So it's a mutually beneficial trade. And maybe what you'd like to have is just you'd like to feel good about supporting their cause. And not just feel good, you just would like to that's something you want and value, is to support a charity's cause, so you contribute. Or maybe you get some direct product for you back out of something and you pay for it and they give you some good or service, but it's all voluntary, it's all consensual. And I think every human interaction should be consensual, but the interaction between citizen and government is not a consensual relationship. It's forced on people. They have no choice. They can't escape it. They can't say no. They have to pay money that they created out of their own efforts, that they created, and they had to go about it peacefully too. They didn't get to tell someone you have to pay me or I'm just going to freeze your bank account and take it from you anyway. They had to do something that was so obviously useful to someone that person would pay them for it. So they create something so obviously useful to the world, whatever it is, whatever job you have, whatever career, whatever you're working at that you're getting paid for. You're creating something so useful to the world that someone will voluntarily give you some of their money for it. And that's the rules you have to play by. But then the government gets to tell you that out of this money, out of this value you created for the world, through your own efforts, through your own through an expense of your own emotional energy, through the expense of your own time, which is the days of your life, we permit the government to require you to give some of that over to their organization. Something we don't allow any other organization to do. And the government ultimately threatens you to make this contribution. They don't ask. They start by asking. They ask nicely. You're just expected to do it. You talk about it in euphemisms like duty, and it's your duty to pay your taxes, and maybe patriotism, and the social contract. We use these euphemisms but let's describe it more precisely. Let's describe the actual operations. What is actually happening here? No euphemisms. The most descriptive explanation of what's happening. You go along with it. You pay your taxes. You file. You tell them how much money you made, as if it's any of your business. You know, like, who else can tell you? You have to tell them how much money you made. Nobody. Anybody tells you have to tell them how much money you made, you're not gonna stand for that. You're gonna say, "Who are you?" It's none of your business. But the government asks, and you do it. And then you pay. But let's say you don't want to. Let's say you decide, well, I made this out of my own life, out of my own body, with my own hands, with my own time. Maybe I suffered to make this. Maybe I was uncomfortable while I was making this. Maybe I would rather have been at home, but I gave up and sacrificed to create this. A roof over my head, food on my table, the clothes on my back, my savings so that I don't have to work forever, even when I'm old. And the government comes in and says, you have to give some of this to me, and you decide, no, I don't want to do that. Why should I? I don't want to contribute to what you're doing. That's fine. I'd rather not pay for what you're doing. I'll pay the people who are giving me something that I think is worth it. And it's my money, so I should get to decide. Well, then what happens? The government will send you an escalating series of increasingly more threatening letters. And it will start to get very serious if you don't pay them. And then they will eventually instruct the banks, which are so heavily regulated by the government and so deeply, inextricably intertwined with government that they are a part of it. There is no free market of money or banking in America. Our banking system is highly centralized and very socialistic. We've had socialist money in America for most of America's history. The government will instruct its banks to just freeze your money, and they won't let you spend any of it. It's money you made. And then you gave it to a bank as an unsecured loan for them to lend to people who want to borrow money from them. It's the biggest scam ever. And the government will then tell them, and then they will, after you've done this for them, they will then, because they're part of the government, the banks will freeze your accounts if you don't pay the government. If you don't pay your taxes to the Treasury, and the government will not let you spend your own money, and they will take out from you what they believe you owe them, and they won't give you a chance even to settle with them and say, well, I think you're miscounting. They'll just take however much, and you won't have any recourse to say that if they take more even than they say they're entitled to take according to their own tax policies. And if you continue to be delinquent in your taxes and resist, what will eventually happen is the government will send police to your house. They will send, and again, let's just be as descriptive as possible. Instead of using euphemisms and constructs, let's just describe what's happening. They will just send men armed with guns to your house to pull you out of your house. And they've got the guns so that you can't fight them. If you fight them, it will turn into a gunfight. And under the barrel of a gun, more or less, they will pull you out of your house and take you to a prison to confine you in a cell as if you were dangerous, as if you were a violent criminal or something, because you didn't want to pay an organization, a group of people, your money. That is theft. That is stealing. That is just straight up stealing from someone. It's almost worse than stealing. It's not even like they just sent someone to your house while you were gone and took a little of your money and ran. They make you pay them. They make you submit. And they do it through force. They do it through threats, and eventually force. Threats of force that they will follow through with. And they have done it. Most people don't take it that far because we're too afraid to. We know that's the end of the road, so we pay our taxes. And again, we use these euphemisms like, oh, it's duty, it's the social contract. We're paying for them to build the roads. You think private companies haven't built things far more complicated and marvelous and useful than even roads without paying for it this way? It's a high price to pay. It's a very high price to pay for roads, and I think we can get roads and charities and retirement plans, retirement funds, and even personal security and safety and insurance, our medical care, even our money. I think all of these things we can, entrepreneurs and private businesses and the free market of people interacting with each other on a mutually consensual basis for mutual benefit can provide all of these things without so drastic a price, the cost of human liberty, the indignity of being forced against your will to give up money that is yours to people who use it for nefarious purposes. In America, you're more likely to be killed by a police officer than you are by a terrorist. You can Google and fact check me on that. 8 times more likely to be killed by the police than by a terrorist. Do we even really need police then? Do we need police absolutely wrecking state budgets with their lucrative pension programs all across the United States? and engaging in, not saying all of them do it, but when they do it, there is virtually no consequence. It is so difficult to convict a police officer because they're government, so we make an exception of murder for doing the same thing that someone else would get convicted of murder for doing. Sometimes they don't even lose their jobs. And then our government takes the money and has created this incredibly vast military-industrial complex, which is godlike in its power, and is constantly, every day, exporting arms to foreign powers. Do you think that really makes you more safe? Making fortunes that will last generations off of money taken from you. And in the process, stirring up and perpetuating and participating in violent conflicts all around the world and making them worse and keeping them going and causing more murder, mayhem, and war. And I think war, which is government taken to its ultimate manifestation, war, which is government being the most like itself to the most extreme the government being the most like itself in the most extreme way. War is the ultimate anarchy. War is by far the ultimate anarchy. There's nothing in human society, no kind of interaction more chaotic than war. And there's no suspension of due process more ultimate than the battlefield or the killing field. Because a lot of times there are no battlefields in war over the last 100 years. There are just killing fields. There are just planes flying overhead, dropping bombs, and murdering people by the thousands, by the tens of thousands, by the millions, all over the world. Over the last 100 years, this has been the history of government. Just flying planes over cities and carpet bombing them. Our government did it. England's government did it. We're rounding them up, putting them in concentration camps, moving them all around the country to remote lands, confining them by the millions. Not for any crime, just for belonging to some class that's been accused of some class guilt, some class crime. As we had with the Jews in Germany, as we had with the kulaks in Russia, as we have with mostly Hispanic immigrants in America today. Just millions of people rounded up, not for anything bad any individual one of them has done, but because they belong to a class of people that has been ascribed some class guilt. And processed through the police state and then dumped off in some distant land, maybe hundreds or thousands of miles away from where they were peacefully living and working. Before the government got involved. And that's just anarchy. That is just plain and utter total anarchy. People say if we follow libertarianism to its extreme, warlords will take over. Well, take a look at what we've got. Warlords have taken over. They are large and in charge, and people are mourning at their funerals like they're the greatest thing, like they're the highest manifestation of humanity. This is the death cult of the state. And government is anarchy. Thanks for listening. Again, my name is Wes. My website is humblelibertarian.com. I've written a lot there, and I want to continue writing there and continue making videos like this. Please subscribe to my channel, and also please visit my website, humblelibertarian.com. I've left a link in the description, and put your email address in the email form in the right sidebar so that I can reach out to you once a week with an email, and so that we can remain in contact with each other. I'll send you emails from my email address once a week or thereabouts, and you're welcome to email me back and contact me anytime. And should any censorship happen from YouTube, which at this point the future remains murky as to how free much of the internet is going to remain, at least if we have each other's email addresses, then we know who each other are, at least by email, and we know how to reach out to each other and stay together instead of letting YouTube disperse our group. Finally, please consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll leave a link in the description, and I would really appreciate your support. I want to make these videos and blog posts and tweets full-time and devote much of my life to sharing this message, and see if we can't change some people's ideas about the world with this insight that we have as libertarians. And if I can get enough support on Patreon, eventually I can upgrade my equipment and can start doing some video as well as just audio. Thanks for listening.